Hi everyone, and thank you so much for coming today. It's nice to see a few friendly faces and friends for coming, and then a lot of new people. So I moved to New York City to study realist drawing and painting, and particularly figurative art and portraiture, quite a while ago now, but I used to live close by the Art Students League. So I went to New York Academy of Art and I studied with Jacob Collins at the Water Street Atelier. But just to be here at the Art Students League, a place that from the moment I moved to New York City, I knew that the Art Students League was a really special place for studying life drawing, realist painting and drawing, and carrying the tradition of fine arts and creativity. It's been doing it for 150 years, and I'm sure it will continue to do it for 150 more. So it's just a real privilege to be here in this very special and historic place for artists. So it's nice to be here. This is my first book, The Path of Drawing. So it just came out about a month ago. My talk today, I'm going to talk to you about some of the themes that I share in this book, and particularly focus on how we as artists can support and nurture our daily practices, our creative practice, stay engaged with it, and even recommit to our creative practice. I feel like the new year is a great time to look back on where you have come on your creative journey and think about where you want to go. And even though I have already been working as an artist for 20 years, I find that I have to strengthen my own commitment, put guardrails around my own creative practice just as much now as when I first started. So that's going to be kind of the theme of today's talk. So this book came out about a month ago and was published by Monticelli Studio Press, which also publishes books like Juliet Aristides' Figure Drawing Atelier, Robert Zeller's Figurative Artist Handbook. So it's a great publishing company for artists and creative people who are interested in art instruction and appreciating books that feature realism and representational painting. So I recommend Monticelli Studio Press. In the opening to my book, I share this quote from the poet Mary Oliver. "What does it mean, say the words, that the earth is so beautiful, and what am I to do about it?" And I started here because I have come to understand about myself as an artist that there are two threads of my life, and one of them is a thread of spirituality and being a seeker, someone who is very interested in experiences in the world that feel transcendental, that inspire me. You know, going to a museum, seeing a beautiful painting. What am I looking for? I'm looking for a feeling. I'm looking for a connection. I'm looking for a sense that there is something larger than myself, something outside myself. And I think one of the great gifts that art can give us is the way in which we can have a sense of human connection through that art that somehow mystically transcends time and place, because it might have been created 400 years ago and yet hangs on the wall of a museum, and I can go and commune with that painting. So whether it's art or other experiences like music or movement theater. I have started out in theater. I'm basically a spiritual person looking for a mystic fix. I'm looking for something transcendental and transporting. So I've come to understand this about my nature as a person, and I bring that to my creative practice. And I was helped in understanding how these things weave together when I learned about this thing called the Tree of Contemplative Practices. And this was actually created by a inspiring writer and thinker named Maya Deurer, who created the Center for Contemplative Mind in Society. And she created this Tree of Contemplative Practices, which creates a visualization of how all of the different things that I find I actually enjoy can we understand understood as part of the same intention, or part of the same concept, as opposed to just disparate things that don't have anything to do with each other. So I find on this tree all these different things that I like, including journaling, drawing, art making, prayer, singing, meditation, gratitude. So I came to understand that my engagement with art was just as much of a creative and meditative or a mindfulness practice as other things that I like doing, like whether it's walking in nature, meditation, and they all center around opportunities for mindfulness. How is it that while we are doing the creative work we are doing, we also have the opportunity basically to listen to our own thoughts and feelings as we sift through that experience. So that was a really valuable insight. My book is a simple, the lessons in my book are about realist drawing, but they're relatively simple and approachable. And if you are the kind of person who is somewhat interested in drawing, but hasn't really ever done a lot of it, there are exercises in this book that really begin at the very beginning, and I'll show you a couple. The materials needed are very simple. I like to use a multimedia sketchbook so that it has thicker paper. A mixed media sketchbook has a kind of a paper that's almost like a cardstock, and then you can use watercolor, gouache, marker, mixed media, and you know that your paper isn't going to get all waffly and warped inside when I use different materials. So my go-to for my creative practice is always a mixed media sketchbook, and I like spiral-bound sketchbooks just because I like to be able to fully open them, wrap them around, and then fully close. So how do we have a practice of inviting creativity in on a regular basis to our lives? Some of us have gotten so addicted to creativity that we've figured out how to to really make it our full-time job, or to really engage with it professionally as part of our creative life. But I think that many people, whether you have you might be a lawyer, you might be a school teacher, you might be a dentist, but there is something inside you that is calling you, is inviting you to engage with creativity. And I learned, there's a book by Julia Cameron, The Artist's Way, and another wonderful one by Elizabeth Gilbert called Big Magic. And both of them talk about how if we have this little calling inside ourselves that is kind of pointing you to embrace a creative practice, but you don't follow it in your life, that will actually lead to a lot of frustration, a lot of jealousy, a lot of stagnation, and even depression in its most extreme form. So I've come to understand that creativity and the practice of inviting creativity into my life, not just once, but in a regular, ongoing way, is part of just who I am. It's part of my nature as a person. And I suspect that most of you, having walked into the Art Students League and found yourself here at this talk, maybe have the exact same sense about yourself as a person. Whether you know that that's going to be something that you are a young person and inspired to spend the rest of your life being a professional artist, and that's your dream, or you have other rich parts of your life, but just know that your life is made better by having creativity in it regularly. So if you have this sense about yourself, this book, and one of the things I want to tell you is that I think it's actually quite important. It's quite important to honor that and understand that about yourself, and then figure out how to make it a part of your life. The book also shares information more specifically about whether I'm using watercolor, collage, mixed media in my sketchbook. What are some of the tools that you might want to have a lot of different options or choices to have a regular daily practice? I'm saying daily, but In fact, I think that a little bit like studying a language, in order to master a language, you can't just take a Spanish class once a week for 30 minutes, right? You actually have to take Spanish several times a week, maybe travel, really engage with it. So I think in order to really have creativity or drawing become a meaningful part of your life, you don't have to do it all day, every day. But you should think about how can you engage with it regularly. Not just once a week, maybe 2 or 3 times a week. Can you do it in order to, maybe the new year is a great time to strengthen a new habit. So you might give yourself a task to, I'm gonna draw every day for 20 minutes for 30 days, or I'm gonna draw 5 days a week for 30 minutes for a month, so that so that the practice of building a habit is about finding a time and a place where you are committed, you've made an intention to do that regularly. So in order to strengthen a habit, there are several factors that you need. You need to be a lot more specific about the when, where, how, and what of what you're doing. So you can't just sort of have the idea, oh, I'm gonna start drawing more regularly. You actually have to take the next step and say, well, when? When in my day am I going to do it? And make a plan for that. Are you gonna do it right after breakfast? Are you gonna do it on your lunch break? Are you gonna do it at 3 o'clock every day, after work, in the evening after dinner? And life happens and we have to change our plans, but the more specific you are about thinking about it beforehand, and maybe even writing it down in your calendar, the more likely it will be that you actually do it. And you saw the slide before. It's like we all have these things about creating a new habit, whether it's exercise, whatever. Oh, I want to do this thing. There are 7 days of the week. Some day is not one of them. You really have to be much more specific about this is when I'm going to do it. So when, and being intentional about that when, and thinking about how many days a week that fits nicely into your life is important. Where is also an important strategy to removing barriers to our habits. So where, for many of us, can just be at a kitchen table or at your desk in your room. But if you have to begin by getting your materials out or finding your sketchbook or clearing space, that in itself might be enough of a barrier that you, well, I'm gonna fold the laundry first and then I'm gonna do this thing, right? So being conscious about where you're gonna do this, for me personally, that means that I have a space on my desk that just has my sketchbook and my tools out so that I don't have to find them. And frankly, also they kind of sit there and look at me so that when I'm sitting down and doing something else other than what I intended, they're like, hey, have you done any drawing today? Runners, I have a runner friend who has a practice where she takes her running shoes and she sets them out next to her bed so that the first thing she sees in the morning is her running shoes because she made a plan to get up in the morning, put them on, and go. So little things like that really strengthen our habits. So what, I talked about sort of the idea of can you have an intention to make a practice a number of days a week for a period of time. And then, so an intention is the other point I want to make, which is that it's very important to formulate an idea and maybe even write it down. And I actually often use my sketchbook, not just for pictures, but often for notes, for thoughts, for journaling, and for something like an intention. An intention, there's also, in meditation or yoga practices, there's a mantra, right? The power of saying something to yourself over and over again is very powerful. So the idea of just writing down your intention for yourself is another really a good way to strengthen your habit. So one of the other barriers to a creative habit and to, frankly, life in general, to all of our habits around life, is the issue of focus. And how do we cultivate focus in our work? And sorry, I'm just realizing, I don't have my timer running. So, wait, I do 11:20. Okay. So okay. Can you focus? And I think we all have a lot of challenges to focus. I think that the pandemic particularly exacerbated this because of issues of anxiety, disruption of our normal routines, changes in where we are doing our work, whether, we used to have one routine, now it's all different. Like, so many things became disrupted. At the same time, all of that is happening, as we all know, social media, the internet, Twitter, right? All of these things just continue to become more and more prevalent. So this concept, the attention economy. So this is a concept that economists, thinkers are starting to talk about, that we are in a period in which your attention is a commodity. And how is it that Instagram or Facebook or Twitter makes money? Those companies pay for advertising on those platforms to get your attention. And they're very good at keeping your attention with music and reels and distractions, right? The universe is getting better and better all the time at distracting you. And so our ability to focus, particularly as artists, it has to be an ongoing intention. And mindfulness towards that is also about how you just notice what's happening. It's after dinner and I'm going to sit for 20 minutes and I'm going to look at stupid TikToks and they're going to be funny. And my kid's going to send me TikToks and I'm going to look at memes and, right, it's recreation, it's fun. Then I try to notice, okay, I've been sitting here for 20 minutes. What was it I intended to do with my time? And how do I turn my attention to something else? So as an artist, mindfulness around when you are distracted, when we're doing other things like procrastinating, which is a really normal, I'll talk a little bit more about procrastination later, really normal and important part of any creative person's life. Mindfulness then is also about how do we redirect ourselves away from the attention that other people are trying to get you to pay to something else, and what is it that you want to do with your time. So you have to prime your intention. And there's a few different things that we can do to kind of help prime our intention, and attention to our creative work. One of my favorite things is very simply to use a 20-minute timer. And this is an idea that's been around a while, but oftentimes you have an intention to do creative work, but then when the moment arrives to actually do the creative work, just like going to the gym, you actually don't want to. You'd kind of rather do something else. Rather maybe just like look at one more funny TikTok, or there's this resistance, right? There's resistance. So I have a practice of simply setting a timer. And then it's kind of a rule. I have set the timer. I must sit here for 20 minutes and do this thing. And if I pick up my phone, I'm not allowed to pick up the phone, set the phone back down. Right. And if all you do is sit there on your tush for 20 minutes, that you won't feel great at the end of 20 minutes if that's what happened, but that is better than allowing yourself to go back to those pathways of distraction, right? It's about intention. And I often, when I'm trying to finish a project with work, I think about, I'm going to nail my feet to the studio floor. Okay, I have to stand here. I have to put my ass in this chair, and I have to do this for just 20 minutes. And 20 minutes, you're like, okay, I can handle 20 minutes. Usually what happens is you're kind of uncomfortable with that for about 5 or 10 minutes, and probably by 20 minutes, you're going to forget that you had a timer running, because you will have actually started. I have a couple other hacks that I like. There is this thing called, I wrote it, actually I think I spelled it wrong. It's not It's binaural. So there's an extra A. B-I-N-A-U. I'm sorry, I totally spelled that word wrong. Binaural. It means two sounds. So bi to aural, ear. And what it is a kind of music, and you can look on Spotify or Google binaural beats, and there's basically different wavelengths that go in each ear. And this is a little like woo-woo science, the idea that like basically it stimulates your brain function to kind of develop deeper theta brain waves. I find it works like magic. I find that I put this stuff in and my blood pressure just kind of goes, because you know that feeling like when suddenly it's silent and you're kind of like, it kind of bothers you that it's silence, you know, and you're sort of distracted by the silence. But then you put on maybe music or like verbal stuff, and that's also distracting. So this thing, binaural beats, also like something like a sound machine that just is even like white noise or brown noise, nature sounds that just are like bird song. It's a little something that gives your brain something to chew on so that your mind can like focus on the job at hand. So I'm sorry I spelled that wrong, but binaural beats is something I really like, and I find it's almost become Pavlovian, that once I put it on, my mind is like, oh, right, I'm focusing now. Choosing your sound environment and being sure to like turn off your ringers, put on do not disturb, turn off the ringers on your computer as well, silence your alerts. If you have your Instagram alerts on, do yourself a favor, make art, turn your Instagram alerts off. So being really conscious about those things. So spiral your way in. This is a wonderful beginning ritual that I learned from the artist Linda Berry. And she writes, before I begin writing, I set a timer for 2 minutes and I draw a slow, tight spiral, and I let my mind's eye drift to the scenes that just come back to me. I just draw the spiral and I drift. And I think this is a really good beginning ritual practice for sitting down with an intention to do a drawing practice or a small creative or a sketchbook practice. With your pencil, please keep your pencil. You really just want to, with your eye, focus your eye on the tip of the pencil. It builds some manual dexterity. Just, you know, is the spiral regular? Is it not regular? You'll notice you're thinking about that as you're doing it. You guys, you have the postcard. You could probably do it right now while I'm talking. And you will notice also at the same time other thoughts that come into your mind. I forgot to call my mom. Oh, I gotta email that guy, right? Okay, that's what's gonna happen, right? And I talked about setting a timer for 20 minutes, 2 minutes. It seems like no time at all. Honestly, when you're just moving your hand quietly for 2 minutes, time stretches out and becomes a longer period of time. And it's a great mindfulness exercise to notice the clutter of things in your mind and focus. So I think there's a magic. I think that part of our brains, especially for artists, live in our hands. And there are things you cannot think without your hands. And that, in fact, it's this feedback loop of the eye, the mind, and the hand together that builds our focus, that builds thoughts, that gives time and space for our thoughts and ideas to emerge. So I think we as artists, we love to talk and not draw because it's painful to actually make art, right? But if you can just get your hand moving, that is when your creative mind really opens up and you start to hear and think and also experience your own thoughts as opposed to other people's. Just briefly, a few other things that you'll find in my book. There's some other really simple beginning exercises for people who don't know much about drawing and want to learn. But simple exercises like this hatching quilt are also good ways to build simple skills like cross-hatching, blending simple tone, stippling. I find I do these kinds of things when I'm sitting in meetings. I think actually they've come to understand that, especially for certain types of people, that when you're doodling, you're actually listening better than when you're trying to sit there and not and pretend you're paying off. So I am one of those people that I actually listen better when I'm also moving my hand. So I find that these kinds of doodles and hatching quilts, while there's this boundary. When are you doodling and when are you drawing? Right, where's the boundary between those two things? And it's really just the name that we allow to give this space. No one can say, oh, I can't even doodle. Everyone can doodle, right? You can. It's just, can you allow yourself to then invite that to keep moving forward to something else? The book also has a lot of projects in it that are designed to help artists. Once you've begun drawing and you're starting to think about what kind of drawing and painting you might want to do, how might you start to cultivate ideas for compositions, your own individual work. In the book, I talk about developing creative ideas. And this exercise, No 10 Thumbnails, is both a technical exercise in learning how to use light and dark in composition of shapes to help understand composition. But it's also a very simple, in 5 or 10 minutes, way to start just making a picture and start building these foundation blocks of how we build pictures and compositions. So I have a couple other things I want to show you in terms of cultivating your individual voice. There is something that I've called creative compost. And creative compost is using, so I'm going to flip to, I'm going to go, so this is, I'm going to flip ahead to one more slide. Creative compost is when, as part of maybe my daily practice or in an ongoing way over the course of a week, months, I will gather images, quotes, pictures, ideas, texts, and I just cut them out from, I really like ephemeral things. I like things that are on paper as opposed to digitally. There are ways you can do this digitally if you're so inclined. But I basically have a practice of gathering images that just intrigue me or inspire me, and I collect them in this, it's a book that is, it's called a presentation folder. You could get it at the an office supply store. It's just basically a 9x12 plastic book with clear plastic sleeves. It has like 24 clear plastic sleeves. So I'll buy one of those, and then as I'm gathering and cutting out pictures, I just shove them in there. It's just a place to keep, the postcard from my friend's show or something else cool that I liked. Like, where do I collect them? So I put them in those sleeves. Then what you want to do, after a couple of months have gone by and you've filled up a third of the thing or a half of the thing or maybe even the whole thing, you're going to go through that and you're going to start sorting it. And you're going to start noticing, are there things that you collected over the period of a few months, many different that are quite similar? Rearrange them and shuffle them and put them together. Are there some in there that are just, you're like, why did I even save that? Like, it's totally boring. Throw it away. Sort and edit and reshuffle. And what that allows you is it helps you to understand better what you are interested in. And you'll find over time, like I'll see, I'm often thinking about paintings. Maybe I think a lot about environmentalism. So if I notice, I've saved all these different images that are about like boats and stormy skies and seas. This starts to present itself as something that is probably the seed of a visual idea, of a creative idea, of a composition idea. So that's one of the ways that create a personal source book. And so over time, I now have 10 of these, right? Because I've been doing this for a while. And then I can look back, what was I interested in 5 years ago? And then I always have a current one, right? So that's a really great way to start understanding your own interests and develop also something like my source book will never look like someone else's, right? This is a way of developing and cultivating my individual interests. I'm going to start to wrap up. I'm going to show a few more things in here about how we use creative compost, or why having visual practice is really useful. As visual people, we want to cultivate visual literacy, which when you are drawing and painting and engaging with like trying to master figure drawing, portrait, it's about cultivating your ability to recognize, to understand visual information, to observe carefully, to observe attentively. And all of those are kind of what I think of as visual literacy. And when you're an artist, obviously you're probably a very highly visual person, but we want visual literacy in all different types of people. I want visual literacy in my car mechanic, in my plumber, in my dentist, in my brain surgeon, right? I want people who know how to observe carefully and attentively, understand, shape, color, texture. So it's a way of being aware of how, as visual thinkers, how can we cultivate that strength? Visualization is a way that we synthesize and put together new ideas, and can create new concepts that maybe didn't exist before. So I think that visual thinking, creative literacy, and visualization are all actually really powerful tools that our daily practices help nurture our own ability to, and then I think have the power to help solve problems in our society. So a vision board is another way to strengthen your creative practice and kind of engage in this practice of creative compost or visualization, visual literacy. What you do with a vision board is intentionally, after having gathered a lot of those visual images, and maybe sometimes when you do a vision board, you're going to spend half an hour, collect a bunch of magazines, spend half an hour, 45 minutes just looking for images, and then kind of pull it together to make a scrapbook. And you learn a lot about even if you don't, when you sit down to do it, you can't know exactly what you're going to find. You don't know exactly what you're looking for. That constant looking and cutting and pulling and making a vision board, you will find your way through it. So it's a way of using visualization or using that practice to help discover something, as opposed to knowing what it is and looking for it. I hope that's clear. So a vision board is another, and making a vision board, for example, to strengthen your intention, you want to have a creative practice, then put it up in a visual place where you're going to see it regularly. And that active visualization, that intention of creating that thing, is going to strengthen your practice and your commitment to your creative work. I want to wrap up in just a minute and give a little bit more time for Q&A. Just really quickly, there's a few other things in my book. One of the things that mindfulness and creativity can be a wonderful thing because it gives us an opportunity to discover new ideas. It also gives us time for our negative voices to plague us, right? So sometimes you're having a great time drawing, and other times you're drawing and the voices in your head are like, what are you doing? You don't even know what you're talking about. This is stupid. This is a waste of time. I think that the real reason most people don't stay in creative work has nothing to do with the fact that they can't crosshatch or they don't have the skills. It's because of these emotional hurdles that we have to get past in order to stay engaged with our creative practice. So the book also talks about how we manage some of these issues and how we use our creative practice to be mindful about them and keep going. Just in closing, my book is, the closing chapter of the book is about light workers. And I think that creative practice, I think that art is a way that we cultivate hope and meaning in our lives. It's a way we cultivate our individual voices and a positive experience with ourselves. And so there's a couple things that become important, which one of them is just self-love. And self-love for a creative person is prioritizing the time that it takes to do this work, and to say that, even though like laundry has to be folded and emails have to be sent, that it is actually very important to sit down for 20 or 30 minutes and do that. And then lastly is just gratitude. Gratitude for our lives, for the work that we have, for our friends, for our community. That the emotion of gratitude and gratitude for our creative work also creates a feedback loop that supports what we are doing and what it means in our lives. So, to be a light worker is a person who is sort of striving to leave the world better than you found it. And I think people who do creative work, who make art, find that really easy to relate to and understand. So I just encourage you to remember how important sort of self-love and gratitude are for those practices. So thank you so much for your time. Hopefully that's enough time for questions.
Oh, great. Patricia, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for your great attentiveness. I see a lot of folks use their question cards just to take notes for themselves. And so that's a great use of that also. If these are your notes, go ahead and keep them. But right now, as you can see, I'm just collecting anyone who'd like to have a question in the Q&A. I'll give you a couple more minutes to think about it. We'll start with these. Patricia, I'd actually love to kick us off with a question that made me very curious while I'm listening in here. So for a lot of us, I think, part of that creative process also might involve collaboration, depending on the medium that you're working in. So I'm curious, these practices throughout your book, do you see, collective having any role in that? They're very individual practices, but what do you think about how these mindfulness practices could be implemented for collaboration?
That's a lovely question. So oftentimes, most of the time, my work as a painter and artist is very solitary. So that has been a little bit more, how do I deal with my feelings in isolation? But that's a really important question. And I have actually done a project with a photographer where we worked together on a long project. And I think I have two thoughts. One is this having faith in the power of intention, that often with collaboration, you don't actually know where you're going. You just have made an agreement that you and this other person or this team of people are going to go together in a certain direction, but you don't actually know where you're going to end up. And so being clear about your intention to collaborate. And then I think the other thing that I find very useful is a concept that I think is important for creatives of non-judgment. And so that it invites a state of openness to whatever is going to happen and whatever is going to come with your collaborator, for example. And so trying to cultivate a mindset of being very open to what's happening, and then trying to, if you notice, like we all, we're trained as, especially in Western society, to judge. This is good, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong, this is drawn well, this is not drawn well. Ultimately, as creative people, most of that judgment is not actually helpful to you, and in fact can be quite paralyzing. And so learning how to notice when you're sort of falling into a pattern of judgment, of good, bad, trying to make a binary, as opposed to having a mindset of openness to let's just discover what's happening in the process. I think that kind of openness really nurtures collaboration.
Thank you for that. And I love that you mention intention in this response, because we have another quite interesting question. Can you speak more about the concept specifically of setting that intention? I don't know if you can nudge us a little bit more in that direction. I think of two things. For one, salient to this talk and the idea of nurturing a practice in the new year, intention, very specifically about I am going to draw, I'm going to spend some time for 20, 30 minutes a day drawing 5 days a week, right? So being really specific about my intention of the what, where, and when to do this creative practice.
So that, and I think that this being specific about your intention to do creative work is important. My other thought is, so writing this book in part came through many years of frankly struggle in my own life of coming to, I was just like good old-fashioned midlife crisis. There was a pandemic, there was a lot of anxiety, there was a lot of depression. Life can be really challenging for lots of different reasons. And I came to really understand how a lot of those mental health issues were completely limiting my creative work and my own positive experience with my creative work. So in that sense, because of that, intention also got very granular for me. For example, like I often deal with like negative self-talk. That's really stupid. I can't believe you just did that. That kind of like the negative things we say to each other in our minds, often related to our creative work. So then I had an intention to cultivate positive self-talk. So if I noticed myself saying that really mean thing to myself, then I was like, okay, there's a habit. Can you create an intention for a positive habit? Can I now say to myself 3 positive things? So it's thinking about like what internally, what is the kind of work that you feel like you need to do? And then can you create an intention that's like, no, I'm not going to speak negatively to myself today. That kind of thing.
Yeah, thank you. That is so instructive. So we do have time for a couple more, and I do have 2 questions here. So let's start there. Just checking in. Anyone with a final burning question they need to share? Okay, let's see if we can fit in 3 more. Thank you very much. So I love this question as well. After you draw and paint, what do you keep and what do you throw away? So it's interesting to think through. A lot of this is experimentational. So how do those experiments then enter your body of work, or how don't they?
Yeah. So there are a lot of things that I abandon or don't finish. I usually don't throw things away for quite a while. I usually, and partly this is kind of this idea of non-judgment, like when I finish a painting, I usually hate it. Sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes I finish a painting and I'm like, this is a really good one. But that's like 5% of the time. Most of the time I finish a painting and maybe it's a pretty great painting, but I'm kind of mad about the mouth that I couldn't quite fix and the way the background didn't really quite, like all I can see are the things that I didn't do exactly the way I wanted. All the good things I can't see, all I can see are the things that are just like really annoying me. So I've come to understand that about myself. And so all of that work, thinking about this principle of non-judgment, I just let it sit. I just pile it up. And then a year later or 2 years, and I do find sometimes it takes about 2 years to look back at something that I made to kind of with really, neutralize and be like, what's that mean? Is it good? Is it not good? And then I will throw it away, repaint it, put a new imprimatur on it, reuse that canvas, throw away some of those drawings. But I tend to keep them for a while.
So our 2 final questions here. What kind of roadblocks did you have at the beginning of your career, and how did you manage those? So I think that's such an interesting question, kind of taking this mindfulness into the professional scope. How have you handled those operational issues?
Yeah. Roadblocks when you're early on, I think I would say that one of the things that I didn't understand then that I've come to understand now is just how long it takes of being persistent to, frankly, get success in the world of visual arts. And when you're young, you might, and it's wonderful, you get some work in a show, in a group show, you have maybe you get a prize, right? And you think, that's it, I got this now, like I've got it made. And then years go, and you're just doing one more thing, and you're doing one more thing, and none of it seems to make any difference. I thought I was gonna arrive, but I haven't arrived yet. And And so the roadblock is then being very patient and persistent with that, understanding that, like I've heard somebody, like an overnight sensation takes 10 years, right? And I think in visual arts, it's actually like 20, to really cultivate your voice, to really I think that was much harder to deal with as a young person, is kind of thinking that you're so excited about something wonderful that happened and you should enjoy everything. Like some prize you got it in a show, it's fantastic and you should really be grateful and pat yourself on the back. But then also understand that you just have to be persistent and keep going. Remember Nelson Shanks, said, Patty, I've done a lot of things, but 9 out of 10 of these things, they don't matter. But which one matters? Which one makes the difference? And doing things is always better than not doing things. So you just got to keep doing the things.
Thank you for that. So we'll end with this one, a very fun question. We'll end on a super light note. Can you tell us about one of the craziest, most unlikely things or situations that you've manifested through visualization?
Oh, God. And no, I'm sorry, I'm not a great storyteller in that way, and I don't have something that really comes to mind. But I can say that I have had some, those 5% of paintings that really do go well, right? Those usually have come through some sort of process where, I got a little visual idea, maybe kind of did a vision board, right? Like kind of using a vision board, mood board kind of idea for an image. And I'll be darned if those vision boards don't actually somehow really develop into exactly what you thought you were trying to do. Or maybe you didn't even know what you were trying to do, but then you look back at the vision board that you made 6 months before, and all of that chaotic, what do even those things mean? And you just look at it and you're like, oh my God, that's exactly what happened, right? And so I've developed a lot of faith in that visualization process, or whether it's specifically making a vision board, or what I think for painting, it's often I'll do for a particular creative project, something that's basically like a mood board. And I'll be darned if the painting happened, it came together. We as artists, the concept of visualization, of manifestation is a little woo-woo and a little abstract, except that you as an artist started with nothing and you got some stretcher bars and some canvas and some crayons and some paint and some brushes, and you literally make something where nothing existed before. So actually, for artists, we see manifestation happen over and over and over again. And then so that in its own way, just that practice gives me a lot of faith that I can do that in any aspect of my life if I choose to focus my attention on it. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much, Patricia.
I hope that you are able to strengthen your creative practice.